Good evening. Welcome to Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Let's get started. All eyes are on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO. It is the world's largest regional organization, covering nearly 40% of the world population. From China's Xi Jinping to Russia's Vladimir Putin, from Iran's Ibrahim Raisi to the Pak Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, leaders are holding big bilaterals, new ties are being forged. On our cover story on Gravitas tonight, we will tell you all about India's agenda. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his way to the summit. Remember, India will take over the presidency of the SCO, and that puts India in a position to set the agenda. So how is India going to position itself amid the anti-West narrative at the summit? We'll explore. Let's dive right in. India is the world's largest democracy, the world's fifth largest economy, and it represents 1/5 of the world's population. Then why can't it have an independent foreign policy? That's the argument that Indian diplomats have pushed in recent months. India's position has been tested, but New Delhi refused to budge. What was the outcome? India now finds itself in a rather unique position at a time when the global order is in a flux. New Delhi has been able to successfully manage the disruption. It has stayed away from blocs and still made its voice heard on world issues. The SCO Summit is an opportunity to build on those gains. Prime Minister Modi has departed for Samarkand. The SCO Summit is underway. Some bilaterals have already happened. Let's now bring you up to speed with the latest and tell you more about what we can expect from the Indian leadership. Day one was dominated by meetings on the sidelines. It is a full house as of now in Samarkand. All key leaders will be in attendance. This includes the 8 permanent members: China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Pakistan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and 3 countries with observer status. That's Belarus, Mongolia and Iran. It's important to note that no representative has been invited from Afghanistan, but no one will ignore Afghanistan. During the talks, Afghanistan is going to be one of the key issues that will be up for discussion. There is also a lot happening on the sidelines. 3 leaders try to grab headlines with their engagements: Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. Let's tell you what they were up to today, one by one. We begin with Xi Jinping. The Chinese president arrived in Uzbekistan last night. Yesterday, he was in neighboring Kazakhstan. He kicked off his engagements from there. And today, President Xi continued with his Central Asia outreach. The Uzbek president greeted him at a welcome ceremony. Xi Jinping also engaged with other key leaders of the region, plus, of course, Vladimir Putin. Yes, that was the big meeting of the day. It's made headlines. The Xi-Putin bilateral on the sidelines of the SCO summit. What did the 2 leaders discuss? Xi Jinping stuck to his message. We told you about this last night on the show. The Chinese president wants to use the platform of the SCO to establish a new world order, a new anti-Western alliance. And for that, Xi says that he is willing to work with Putin. Listen in.
Facing an ever-changing world, era and history, China is willing to make efforts with Russia to assume the role of great powers and play a guiding role to inject stability and positive energy into a world rocked by social turmoil.
Now that was like music to the Russian president's ears. In his comments, he reaffirmed Russia's no-limits partnership with China, and of course he lectured the West. Putin didn't stop there. He praised China for its position on the Ukraine invasion and gave his full-throated support to Chinese actions in Taiwan.
We highly appreciate the balanced position of our Chinese friends in connection with the Ukrainian crisis. Attempts to create a unipolar world have recently acquired an absolutely ugly form and are completely unacceptable. For our part, we stand firm on the One China principle. We condemn the provocations of the United States and its satellites in the Taiwan Strait.
It wasn't just the leaders, their militaries were also talking. China and Russia are now conducting joint military drills in the Pacific. This has significance. It's the backyard of the United States, after all. Moscow announced these drills today. The Russian Defense Ministry released these pictures and as Putin ramped up his anti-West rhetoric at the SCO. The Russian president held other meetings too. He met with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the Kyrgyz President Sadir Japarov, the Iranian President Raisi, and these were all closed-door meetings. But Putin's objective behind it was clear. The Russian president is bolstering his roster of allies. He's reaffirming old ties and strengthening new relationships. Western sanctions have practically shut Russia out of key global forums. It's isolated. So the SCO becomes vital for Russia to sustain its engagement with the outside world. Iran is in a similar position. It is trying to overcome its own economic isolation. Iran holds an observer status at the SCO. Tehran is about to get an upgrade, however. Today, the Iranian leadership signed a memorandum. This paves the way for Iran's permanent membership to the SCO. Tehran has officially committed to fulfilling the SCO obligations. So how quickly can it be inducted to this summit, this organization? It could happen as soon as next year. Just like Putin, the Iranian president too didn't miss an opportunity to take on the US.
The Americans think whichever country they impose sanctions on, it will be stopped. In my opinion, their perception is a wrong one. The relationship between countries that are sanctioned by the US, such as Iran, Russia or other countries, can overcome many problems and issues and make them stronger.
You heard him. So that's the pitch from Russia, China and Iran. They want to push the SCO towards taking a hard line against the West. And here is where India's role becomes ever important. India could become a much-needed voice of moderation within the SCO. India could push its SCO partners, bring attention back on regional issues that matter instead of focusing its energies on the West. The Indian leadership is in a unique position because India will take over the presidency of the SCO. India will hold this position for the next 12 months. It will host the SCO Leaders Summit. And that puts India in a position to set the agenda at the SCO. So what will be India's approach? Which issues would New Delhi like to pay attention on? Let's tell you. Terrorism and security will certainly top India's agenda. This includes the situation in Afghanistan. What are some of the other issues? Energy security, trade and economic cooperation, and of course, the proposals to expand the alliance. Before the summit, India spelled out the expectations for the summit. Let's listen.
We expect that the discussions during the summit would cover topical, regional and international issues, reform and expansion of SCO, the security situation in the region, our cooperation perspective in the region, including strengthening connectivity, as well as boosting trade and tourism in the region.
So that's what we can expect. But before Prime Minister Modi began his trip to Samarkand, he held a crucial dialogue with another strategic partner here in New Delhi. We'll tell you about that. But before we dive into that meeting, let's get you some live action from the SCO. We at WION, we've got our correspondents on the ground getting you all the latest updates as the bilaterals get underway. Let's go over to them now. Anas Malik, our Pakistan Bureau Chief, is in Samarkand. Also joining me now on Gravitas tonight is Siddhant Sibal, our principal diplomatic correspondent. Siddhant, I'd like to start with you. India's presence at this summit is important because it will assume the rotational presidency of the SCO. China, Xi and Russia's Putin are already forging closer ties. In fact, Xi has told Putin that China is willing to work with Russia as great powers. So how is India placed in all of this?
Well, for the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the priority is said that is the fact that the presidency of the grouping will be handed over to India. That means that India will be hosting the summit next year, which means inviting countries like China and Pakistan. But when you're part of this grouping, you have to follow all the rules. And for India, what this grouping brings on the table is closer ties with Central Asian countries and, of course, with a long-standing partner, that is Russia. We know that when it comes comes to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's schedule on Friday, it's divided into two parts. First, of course, the morning will be dedicated to his engagements at the SCO, and the family photo is something that everyone will be keenly watching, where the leaders of the SCO member countries, that's the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, along with other Central Asian countries will be present. So body language, perhaps everyone will be keen to notice on. But the latter half of the day has been dedicated to bilaterals. The Indian Prime Minister meets the Russian President, he meets with the Iranian President and with the Uzbek President, who is the host. But the big question is, will the Indian Prime Minister meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, or perhaps pull aside with the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif at a time when Pakistan, of course, faces the devastating floods in the country, and that is something nobody is ruling out. But any meeting, even if it's a handshake between the Indian and the Chinese leaders here in Samarkand, will be seen as a big breakthrough, given that the relationship has nosedived since the Galwan incident of 2020, in which India lost 20 of its soldiers.
Right, absolutely, Siddhant. Thanks for that. Anas, coming to you now. Let's talk about the bilateral between the Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Pak Prime Minister is facing plenty of internal politics given the crippling economic crisis back home. Will this diplomatic outreach at the SCO help get Pakistan out of the crisis?
Well, clearly, Priyanka, it is helping Pakistan in one way or the other, and if reports are to be believed in a section of the Pakistani media, then the proposal that was put forward in February when the previous Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was visiting Moscow, that has been reiterated by the Russian side. If reports are to be believed, there is only cautious optimism for that. As we speak, we know that the Pakistani Prime Minister met the Russian President. The Russian side is yet to put out their statement, but the Pakistani statement lays it out very clearly. First, the component is to do with floods. The second component is to do with the bilateral fora and the intergovernmental commission engagements. And the third is to do with Afghanistan. That is something that is very clear. Afghanistan is something that is a point of convergence for Pakistan and Russia both, primarily because it's the next door neighbor of Pakistan, and any events that take place in Afghanistan have a direct impact on Russia. Therefore, the meeting did take place, and we're yet to hear from the Russian side on their part or on their version. Priyanka.
Right. Anas and Siddhant, thank you so much for all those updates, and thanks for joining us on Gravitas tonight. Now, clearly, as we can see, all the focus is on Samarkand right now, but back in New Delhi, an important visitor is in town, Catherine Colonna. She's the foreign minister of France. She arrived in India on Tuesday with one message from President Emmanuel Macron to offer a no-limits partnership to India. Did she do that? Let's find out. Minister Colonna held 3 important meetings in Delhi. She met Prime Minister Narendra Modi, of course, the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. The discussions covered multiple political and economic issues like the war in Ukraine, the food and fuel crisis, China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific, UN reforms, and climate change. First up, let's take a look at the key takeaways. Number 1, India and France have announced 2 trilateral partnerships, one with Australia and another one with the United Arab Emirates. Both these trilaterals will focus on the Indo-Pacific. Their ministers will meet on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in the coming weeks. Number 2, the focus on blue economy. Now, what does that mean? Blue economy refers to the sustainable use of maritime resources for economic growth, like fisheries or tourism, or even maritime transport. India and France will cooperate in these spheres. In fact, India will be the country of honor at the Sea Tech Week in Brest. It is basically a global forum on blue economy. Let's talk about takeaway number 3 now, nuclear cooperation. France will work with India to develop the Jaitapur nuclear plant, and once completed, it will be the largest in the world. Takeaway number 4. France is hoping to welcome more Indian students, to be precise, 20,000 of them by the year 2025. And finally, takeaway number 5, UN reforms. Minister Colonna reaffirmed her support for India's permanent membership in the Security Council, and that's crucial. France is a key strategic partner for India, and the reason for that is simple. France isn't just a European power, it is also an Indo-Pacific power. How so? Because of this tiny island that you can see. It is an overseas territory of France called Reunion Island. It is located around 1,000 kilometers of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. This makes Paris an Indo-Pacific power. Plus, they offer more options for India. You see, the Indo-Pacific is becoming a saturated playground. You have the Quad, you have the AUKUS, you have the Five Eyes Alliance. So India too is keeping its options open essentially, and that's where France slots in. The AUKUS alliance was an embarrassing snub for them. Australia ditched them to make submarines with the US and Britain. So what does France do? Turn to India for alternatives, sort of like a non-Anglophone Indo-Pacific alliance. But the question is, what's in it for India? For starters, military partnerships. India has already bought state-of-the-art Rafale jets from France. It is the second largest arms supplier to India. The first one being Russia. The next step of this partnership, however, is technology transfers and joint ventures. French company Safran is setting up an engine facility in Telangana. It will be used to maintain, repair and overhaul aircraft engines in particular. The investment is worth $150 million. It is expected to create 1,000 skilled jobs. Another venture is the submarine production sector. India and France are cooperating on the P-75 submarine project. Minister Colonna visited the Mazgaon dockyard to review the progress. So clearly, the trajectory is good. Defence purchases first, joint ventures next. This partnership could also drive India's relationship with Europe. Since Brexit, the European Union has only one nuclear power, and that's France. Think about that. So Emmanuel Macron has considerable influence over the EU. That benefits India when it comes to trade deals in particular, strategic cooperation or just diplomatic support. I know it sounds like a perfect bilateral relationship, but that's just a myth in geopolitics. Every bilateral relationship has its differences. The question is, how do you minimize them? For India and France, there are two such issues: China and Russia. Initially, President Macron was non-committal on China. He saw Beijing as a competitor, not a rival. But China's tacit support for Russia's war has toughened his position, and that reflected in the foreign minister's statement. She said that India and France share the same concerns on challenges linked to China. So that's one difference, minimized. What about Russia? France has openly condemned and sanctioned Russia. India has done neither. Minister Colonna was asked about his policy difference in an interview, and here's what she said. I quote, "We know the differences in our relations vis-a-vis Russia." She added, "We do respect your country's decision to keep going with some relations." Now that should encourage India. Like I said, it's all about keeping your options open. Because remember, the ultimate objective isn't to create a US-led Indo-Pacific order. It is to create a multipolar Indo-Pacific. And for that, both India and France need each other's help. Moving on now, our next story is from Australia. It has refused a request from China, a request to join a free trade pact. Some of you must have already heard the name. It's called the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is one of the world's most extensive free trade agreements. It has a total of 11 countries as signatories, and together they represent 13.4% of the world's GDP. So what is this agreement meant for? Three things. 1, protecting intellectual property rights. 2, safeguarding markets from state intervention. And 3, reducing trade barriers between member states. So what has China requested from this bloc? Membership. It wants to be a part of this agreement, a request it has made repeatedly in the last 2 years. In May 2020, China's Premier Li Keqiang said that China was willing to consider joining this pact. Then in November 2020, the Chinese president also expressed interest. He said China was actively considering joining the agreement. And in September 2021, China formally applied to join the agreement. It's been 12 months. And China's application hasn't got any traction. It is yet to be approved by this pact's member states. Now, why is that? Because the members of this agreement believe that China does not meet the required standards. They say that the CCP's intervention in the Chinese economy is in stark contrast to what this agreement claims to promote. And that is free and fair trade without any state interference. So China's application still remains stuck in transit. Left with no choice, a desperate Beijing has asked Australia to reconsider including China as a member. Reports say the Chinese ambassador to Australia is urgently pushing for talks with the country's federal government. And this is what he told an Australian news network. That while China has been asking for an early start, there's no clear affirmative response from the Australian government yet. So the question is, why is the Australian government not responding? Why would it? China's track record on Australia has been less than ideal. For the last 2.5 years, Beijing has pursued a policy of economic coercion against Canberra. It has issued threats, imposed trade restrictions, banned exports of key ingredients, and undermined Australia's territorial sovereignty. In fact, even now the Chinese media is preaching Australia on why refusing China's application would prove costly. On your screens now is a recent report from the Global Times. Look carefully at what the headline reads. Provoking China is dangerous for Australia as a US proxy. In another Global Times report, China slams Australia for concocting lies against it. The headline sanctimoniously reads, Australia advised to take a rational approach to China's supply chains. I repeat, take a rational approach, says the most irrational country in the world. Australia is clearly in no mood to change its approach. If anything, it is only returning the gesture. It is stalling China's application on purpose, to pressurize Beijing into dialing down tensions. Now, this is what the Australian Prime Minister said recently. It is China that has imposed sanctions on Australia. They need to remove those sanctions in order to improve relations. Australia's message is loud and clear. If China wants to do business with it, it will have to be on Australia's terms. And if China wants to join the Free Trade Pact, it will have to prove that it promotes free and fair trade. And last week checked, the two words free and fair were missing from China's dictionary. Our next story is from Hungary. It has passed a new decree on abortion, one that asks pregnant women to first hear the fetal heartbeat before they get an abortion. Hungarians say this law is an extension of the country's growing restrictions on abortion. The Hungarian government says such measures are needed to stop Hungary's population from declining. Naturally, a war of words has begun. Our next report brings you some data which explains this dilemma from both sides. Take a look.
Located on the eastern edge of Europe is the landlocked country of Hungary, a place with deepening ideological differences, a growing divide between liberals and conservatives. The credit goes to this man, Viktor Orbán, a nationalist and populist leader who has ruled Hungary since 2010. His tenure has been marked by democratic backsliding and an abysmal drop in civil rights. The worst affected are the women of Hungary. For the last 12 years, they've borne the brunt of Viktor Orbán's orthodox policies. Chief among them are his policies on abortion. They keep getting worse. A new regulation passed on Thursday mandates that women seeking an abortion will have to listen to the heartbeat of their fetus. Why? Because the country's leader commands it. This is what a notification by Hungary's Interior Ministry reads. Nearly 2/3 of Hungarians associate the beginning of a child's life with the first heartbeat. Doctors must issue a report which records that pregnant women have been presented with the factor indicating the functioning of fetal vital functions in a clearly identifiable manner. What exactly is the aim of this law? Hungarian lawmakers are calling it a chance for life, an attempt to make women reconsider undergoing an abortion. Not a lot of people agree, though. Hungarian activists say this move is meant to humiliate women, that it will only make accessing abortion more burdensome. How exactly? You see, under Hungarian law, the right to abort is available only in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy. That too on certain complex medical grounds, like a pregnant woman being in a severe health crisis. Activists claim the new decree will send this right for a toss. They say it will delay the abortion process by making women undergo more checkups. They also point at previous such measures that undermine a woman's autonomy over her body, like making women undergo mandatory counseling sessions. making them seek letters from gynecologists confirming their pregnancy and making them visit family service where they're briefed about state benefits for mothers. The government of Viktor Orban defends these measures by citing data on Hungary's population. It's on the decline. The country's total fertility rate stands at 1.43. That is well below the populate replacement rate of 2.1. This graph breaks it down for you. Hungary's population has decreased by 0.3% each year. If this trend persists, the country's current population of 9.66 million people will decline to 6.87 million people by the end of this century. These figures are in stark contrast to abortion acceptance in the country. According to data, nearly 2/3 of Hungarians favor abortion and would like to see no further restrictions. What does this tell you? That Viktor Orban's new decree may have some merit rooted in reality, but given his growing authoritarianism, the people of Hungary will not accept it. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Moving on now, let's talk about the biggest health crisis in recent times, the COVID-19 pandemic. This December will mark 3 years of the crisis. It started off as an obscure outbreak in China, but within months, it locked down the entire world. I know most of you have suffered in these last years, maybe lost a loved one or lost your job due to the lockdown. But all that could soon be coming to an end, because on Wednesday, the World Health Organization's chief had this to say.
We can see the finish line. We are in a winning position. But now is the worst time to stop running. Now is the time to run harder and make sure we cross the line and reap the rewards of all our hard work.
Sounds encouraging, doesn't it? After almost 3 years, the pandemic could be coming to an end finally. Yes, it calls for a celebration. But it also calls for caution. Like Dr. Tedros said, this is the worst time to stop running. This is the time to deal the killer blow, to end the pandemic once and for all. The last thing we need is complacency, and these numbers will tell you why. In 2022 alone, more than 1 million people died from COVID-19. Around 321 million contracted the virus. So the pandemic isn't over per se. The difference is we are simply better prepared to handle it. We have vaccines, boosters, medicines, everything we need in an arsenal to combat the virus. Having said that, 2 challenges remain. The first is vaccine equity. Yes, 2 years later, we are still talking about the same issue. Most Western countries have announced booster doses and double boosters even. But in Africa, vaccination continues to be slow. By July 2022, only 21% of the population had been double dosed. Imagine that. Only 1 in 5 Africans had been vaccinated, and that's the #1 priority as of now. To make sure that every part of the world has access to vaccines, it will be key to reopening national economies. The second challenge, of course, is long COVID. We've been talking about it on the show. There is very little we understand about the long-term impact of this virus. Almost every day there is a new study out. The latest one talks about gender disparity. 1 in 3 females are likely to suffer from long COVID, it says. For males, it's 1 in 5, which means women are twice as vulnerable as men. Another study links long COVID to mental health. Assume you were stressed or depressed before you contracted the virus. Chances are you will have long COVID. This study was carried out by Harvard. It found that psychological distress increased the risk of long COVID by 32 to 46%. My point is this: we are still learning about this problem, about this virus, and chances are it will be quite a long process. There will be multiple studies, theories and trials before we can conclusively understand long COVID. And whatever you do, don't make a joke about it. Like this actor from Pakistan. She was on a philanthropic tour of flood-hit areas. While crossing a bridge, she had a sudden spurt of brilliance. Why not feed the fish below? The actor took out packets of bread and emptied them into the river. So far, so good, right? But what she did next has enraged netizens. She threw the plastic wrapper into the same river. So much for saving aquatic life. When social media users called her out, this actor came out with the most bizarre explanation possible. Listen to this. I have had COVID twice and its effects are still there. I forget things and don't remember what I did 4 hours ago. As far as excuses go, not a good one. This actor is blaming long COVID for her negligence. She's calling it brain fog. Now, just to be clear, brain fog is a symptom of long COVID. Doctors say that 22 to 32% of recovered patients display this symptom. But blaming it for your mistakes is certainly not okay. Chances are we will hear more such stories in the future. Bizarre incidents blamed on long COVID, which is why we need more medical studies. We need to understand how to identify long COVID and how to treat it. And this requires government help. Remember how every world leader was taking credit for the vaccines? You remember that? It was almost like a race. Well, we need the same eagerness to solve long COVID as well. We end tonight's show with some news that came in a short while back. Roger Federer is retiring. I'm afraid there is no easy way to put it. Federer announced his decision on social media. He said the upcoming Laver Cup in London will be his last tournament. Needless to say, it's a tough one to take. For more than 2 decades, Roger Federer was tennis. Yes, you had Rafael Nadal, you had Novak Djokovic, but in many ways, Federer was synonymous with the game. Perhaps because of the longevity of his career. Let's tell you some figures. He has played more than 1,500 matches over 24 years. His career spanned multiple generations. When Federer made his debut, the game was dominated by the likes of Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi. He played and beat both of them. And then came the likes of Rafael Nadal, Andy Roddick, and of course, Novak Djokovic. Possibly the golden era of modern tennis. And recently, he also played against the newbies. The likes of Alexander Zverev and Daniil Medvedev. So looking back, Federer's career spanned 3 generations of players. Not only did he compete against them, he beat most of them. And that's what makes his career so special. Let's also look at the numbers. Federer has won 20 Grand Slam titles. He's won a total of 103 career titles, the second most in the Open era. His win percentage is almost 82%. And how can we forget his proficiency on grass? Federer at Wimbledon was almost like poetry. He won his favorite tournament 8 times. In fact, his last match was there. In 2021, Federer lost in the quarterfinals to Hubert Hurkacz. But tennis fans won't remember that one for long. For most of us, the best Roger moments are him gliding over the grass. He actually released an audio message along with today's announcement. Listen in.
When my love of tennis started, I was a ball kid in my hometown of Basel. I used to watch the players with a sense of wonder. They were like giants to me, and I began to dream. My dreams led me to work harder, and I started to believe in myself. Some success brought me confidence, and I was on my way to the most amazing journey that has led to this day. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart to everyone around the world who has helped make the dreams of a young Swiss ball kid come true. Finally, to the game of tennis, I love you and will never leave you.
Well, as they say, all good things must come to an end. Roger Federer is 41 years old. His body was struggling to keep up with the needs of the tennis circuit. Recently, he had undergone a knee surgery, so maybe it was the right time to call it quits. All things said, it has been a great career in tennis. I may get in trouble for saying this, but according to some, perhaps the greatest career in tennis. His last tournament will be the Laver Cup next week in London. Let's hope he can finish on a high. And of course, on behalf of tennis fans here in India and around the world, thank you, Roger. And now let's take a look at what else made news. Time for the Gravitas Global Headlines.
Azerbaijan says 71 of its troops have died in border clashes with Armenia over the last 2 days, in the worst fighting since 2020. A U.S. Senate committee approves the Taiwan Policy Act to directly provide billions of dollars in military aid to Taiwan. China says the bill sends wrong signals on Taiwanese independence. Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson announces her resignation after an unprecedented right-wing and far-right bloc nearly won Sunday's election. Major U.S. railroads and unions secured a tentative deal after 20 hours of intense talks, brokered by the Biden administration to avert a rail shutdown that could have hit food and fuel supplies across the country and beyond. A TikTok executive declines to comment to cutting off flow of American user data to China in a testimony to U.S. lawmakers, probing impact of social media on homeland security. R&B singer R. Kelly, who is serving a 30-year sentence for sex offenses, found guilty of child pornography and other charges after a month-long trial in Chicago. Apple's in-app purchase prices increase 40% year-over-year in July due to privacy changes, compared to a mere 9% on Google Play Store. High winds and heavy rains lashed China's east coast as Typhoon Muifa forced around 1.6 million people to leave homes and grounded most flights at Shanghai's main airport. Paris Saint-Germain's StarCast scored in the same game for just the third time as they defeated Israeli outfit Maccabi Haifa 3-1 in Champions League Group H encounter. Meanwhile, defending champions Real Madrid continue their perfect start to the season with a 2-0 win over RB Leipzig. NBA superstars LeBron James and Chris Paul questioned the NBA's sanctions on Phoenix Suns owner Robert Sarver over racist and sexist workplace conduct. The two players believe the one-year ban and $10 million fine is too lenient.
And with that, it's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching Gravitas with me, Priyanka Sharma. As always, we leave you with Gravitas images.